The policies that you adopted yesterday are not enforceable until they go through the OAL process. So what is before you is the paperwork, if you will, the critical paperwork, so that the policies are not just paper that cannot be enforced, but that they actually are meaningful and are lawful regulations.
Okay. All right. Any other slips of paper? Anyone else in the audience like to speak on this aspect and issue? Council members, any final questions? Maybe one of the staff could wave at Mr. Johnston, who's outside on an emergency call, and see if he's available to come back. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Natola.
And this relates to the costs, and I think I reread the material, and I know I had questions at the time. The first analysis came forward, and then we had a revised presentation to us and so forth. And I think that part of the question mark that remains, at least in my mind, relates to regulations and to, in actuality, what they provide as far as encumbrances, cost encumbrances to those who then have to comply. And, my experience has been, certainly from a local government perspective, that generally when more regulations are applied, there are costs. And sometimes there are hidden costs, sometimes there are known costs, and I think that analysis tried to drill down to some of that and has a lot of citations about law and about recovery and about authorities and so forth. And I want to point out that from a practical standpoint, that it's nice to say, well, yeah, you have the ability to recover, but then it puts the onus back onto reclamation districts, cities or counties or whoever it is, and obviously there are others that are affected by this that are going to have to bear those costs, and that's part of complying with the law. But I guess the point I want to make about this, and I think it's relevant, I think it may provide an important distinction or difference for the way this council going forward approaches its responsibilities, but also the recognizing some of the transactional and regulatory costs of that is to do a touchback. And really, because it's one thing to say, yeah, we think it's going to be this, or it won't be that much, it may add this percentage, but as there's some level of experience, either with appeals or consistency, covered action determinations, and then to, again, call upon those who are the regulated community, and whether they be those that are moving water through the delta, or those that are doing projects, or those that are having to make certain determinations, because it's just presumed that life will go on and people will adjust, and yeah, people will comply with the law and do their best to do that, but there are costs associated with it. And I think that particularly when it comes to some of the the folks that Ms. Meserve represents, who again have to try to straddle the various regulatory lines that are there to actually do a project that may provide a good level of protection and or improvement for whether it's habitat or for people or for properties and flood protection and so forth, that having to have that additional look at setback levy or have additional requirements, it's easier for us to consider approving a regulation that is actually like trying to comply sometimes. And I think part of this, I guess to my point, is I do believe that there should be at certain junctures, and maybe it's a year out or even on a regular basis, to have some look at that and actually do some touchback, because I think then knowing, one, what you're doing on the side of complying with the plan, but also what sort of costs are being borne by folks, because those are real. And sometimes it can be the difference between doing something and not. And even if it's something that's good that this plan would be supportive of, it may be an inhibitor, and in a way. So I think a recognition that we don't know all those answers, you can try to drill down to it and get some idea. But I think from the standpoint of those who will have to, live within the plan as being the law, as soon as these regulations are ultimately adopted, I think that's important. And I think it's important, certainly to the folks that you want as partners in complying with the plan and hopefully helping the Delta to get healthy, and healthier, and to accomplish the things that are outlined in this plan, not only with the COICO goals, but obviously the Delta as a place. And so I would encourage that, and maybe it's some extra effort going forward from a staff perspective, but I think that's an important and key component. It may help to distinguish us from all the other entities and agencies that just pass plans and pass rules and then pass the cost on, to have some recognition that there are some costs associated, there's costs associated with not doing certain things. And I would encourage us to maybe take a little different perspective on this. And so I don't know if there's any staff response to that, again, but I think that we should, going forward, have a touchback.
That would be a good thing for us to bear in mind, even in our own estimates for budgetary purposes of our future needs. We're having to make some assumptions about how the covered action process will roll out and what it would mean. And with several years' experience, it wouldn't be difficult to survey folks who'd filed consistency certifications to learn more about how the process has worked from a variety of points of view, including the cost. And we might think of that as an element of our adaptive management program, learning how we can do a better job. And so it's a good thing for us to bear in mind. We appreciate the suggestion.
Thanks, Dan.
I understand that the cost estimates are not part of the motion in front of us, but I just wanted to make a notation. We adjusted the cost estimates down as a result of the changes that were made, I believe primarily to the setback levy requirement, reducing the number of local agencies who might have to even study the option.
There were two primary reasons for the adjustment down. The first is what you just mentioned, narrowing the scope of those setback levy evaluations. And the second was the recognition that the levy prioritization was a statutory mandate and not something that was added by the regulation, and so that got shifted out.
Okay. All right. Okay, Mr. Johnston, in your absence, we received public testimony. We have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2013-3. Okay, any questions, comments by members of the council? Don?
On the motion, Mr. Chair, there is, I believe it's on 5006. Excuse me, it's 5013. I'm sorry, 5013 on page 18. The council has debated this and made a determination. I need to register, again, concern, and I'm not so sure in the context of a motion where you have the entirety of the regulations before us, but I still want to register some strong objections to the additional layer of regulation here, but I think some of the unknown costs and implications of instituting approach this council, again, has debated and decided as it relates to on 5013, where for rural residential development exceeding 5 or more parcels, that we will now basically require 12 inches over the 100-year base flood elevation, and in addition to that, then elevation that would reflect anticipated or predicted 55-inch rise in sea level at the Golden Gate. Unless with all the things outlined. So
Would you wish to have the minutes reflect your concern with regard to the provisions of regulatory language 5013?
Yes.
Okay. Without objection, in the motion, we would make a note in the minutes of the meeting, and Mr. Stevens, you're going to work with Mr. Natoli to get the right expression of it, but Mr. Natoli expressed his reservations concerning Section 5013, regulatory Section 5013. Okay, Ms. Gray?
I wanted to be noted that I do still oppose policy 5003 because it's relying on
Okay, and without objection from the council, the minutes will reflect Ms. Gray's initial opposition to and continued reservations concerning WRP1, which is, let me get the right regulatory code section correctly.
It's 5003.
5003? 3. Okay? All right. Other comments, questions, suggestions? Okay, starting with Mr. Nordhoff.
Damrow, aye.
Gray eye.
Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Totally aye.
Okay. Well, members, thank you very much. That's pretty impressive to get it done. Before we get out of here, Mr. Nordhoff, I want to return to the... it's not over. Oh, well, Fooey. I want to make sure we don't forget that item 7 on the agenda to put in resolution form the methodology. As a matter of fact, let's take that. If we can go to item 7, take up the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt that as a direction to staff?
Yes.
Mr. Johnston, second. Mr. Nordhoff. Anyone in the audience like to speak to item 7, direction to staff on the methodology of the levy standard study? Seeing no one who wishes to speak, starting with Mr. Nordhoff.
Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Totally aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I just want to thank you all for sitting still. It's probably worth noting the staff's gotten a couple praises, but they have been staggering around like zombies for the last 2 months trying to put all of this stuff together. And our professional staff is good. Our legal advice is terrific, both from the AG and Shoot Mahali. But I want to make a note that the staff that had the obligation to take all the work of all the geniuses, policy and legal, and actually deliver them in a packet of material or packets of material, that latter work, I thought Cindy was going to shoot people about 4 weeks ago for not getting their material in on time. She looked dangerously angry, and Angela and Pat have done yo-person's work on putting this together. I see it every day, and it's very complicated to do, but it's very important. Randy?
Just echo those comments and really appreciate the work of staff thus far. I know it's been a huge burden and effort, but it has paid off with 3 7-0 votes. I think that's a real credit to the work that you all have done. And now the fun really begins. Let's implement this thing.
Fun. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Natoli.
And I know we've got several items, and again, not to be redundant, but we will have back on the June agenda then the discussion about the construct of the implementation committee. I know Mr. Freeman is going to be heading that up, and I've chatted a bit, so that will be on our June agenda.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Ms. Gray.
Just comment, I echo all comments regarding the staff and this comment, but I want to thank the chair for his
Hit your button.
I want to thank the chair for his leadership. We may not have agreed on everything, but thank you for keeping us focused on important issues. So just wanted to acknowledge
that. Well, but it is actually, as Randy points out, an interesting and important and mostly fun process. We live in a society that demands efficiency. Well, I will do it. James Wilson is my favorite conservative writer on governments, and he says American government is just stranger than anything else. We've got 2 absolutely inconsistent themes. One is we depend on rules, which in societies normally means heavy-handed regulatory stuff, and we simultaneously depend on public involvement, whether it's the involvement of citizens or the press or legislators. And the notion that you could get a society to cooperate on those 2 things, some rules and constant involvement of commenters and critics, is, he argues, unlike any other kind of legal form in the world. He says it works not perfectly, but it works well for all of its clumsy and very convoluted nature. And these processes are illustrations of that, but I just want to thank all the members of the staff and council members for sticking with it, and we'll see you next month where the victory speeches are over and, as Randy says, the work begins. Thank you very much. Okay, meeting adjourned.